Can you just start by introducing yourself and just give a bit of a context of what you do?
Okay, so I'm Emma Drabble. I'm a documentary/commercial photographer, and basically I started work as a documentary photographer in the late 1980s, 90s, and my kind of degree was in documentary photography, and I guess I've been practicing photography for my entire life.
So can you just give us a bit of a context about the kind of work that you do, and just tell us what work you do in Herefordshire, particularly, and who you work for and those kind of things? Because you were talking about the other day at the screen, it's quite interesting saying about going around the businesses, and it's a bit of a current state of,
Definitely. So with my job, it it entails, particularly sort of on the commercial side, means that I go in lots of different businesses and actually essentially tell the story behind all those businesses. Now, I think from the perspective of a client asking me to kind of come in and take pictures for them, well, essentially it's like, come in and actually can you just do a portrait? But actually that usually leads on to other things. And for my job as a documentary, essentially what was first a documentary photographer, I've already got that interest in telling the story. So that's probably what makes me as a commercial photographer possibly quite unique, in that when somebody says, can you take my portrait, or can you take a series of portraits? Well, in actual fact, the photograph is never just about the portrait. It's about 80% telling the story and 20% taking the picture.
So how would you relate that to Derek's work? Do you see some parallels in there with Derek's work?
Absolutely. The beauty of being asked to photograph or take pictures in the style really of Derek, or revisit Derek's work, is an absolute blessing for me, because I was originally a documentary photographer and those roots are still absolutely solid within me. So when I kind of was introduced to Derek's work, it was as I said, it was a blessing, because I got to open that up and actually got the permission to go back into my documentary roots, exactly what is in my heart, and actually photograph and really meet all the original documentary themes that Derek also has met himself.
So tell us a little bit about how when you saw his photographs, what was your kind of immediate response to them?
So Derek's work in particular, he's got again a style of storytelling, and the storytelling is the most important element. It's easy to say, well, actually anybody could walk in there with a journalistic mind and take those pictures. That's not the case, because he has got an absolute interest in people, in the children surrounding every event, and he's seeing the long picture. He's seeing that those photographs that his photographs are all about longevity. And that is what's really important, that we all have to think about photography in those terms. Because I may be photographing for a commercial client myself these days, and even if I'm not, and I have to address those documentary roots, but even if I'm photographing, to repeat myself, going into commercial sense, I have to say, well, actually this moment in time that I'm photographing is going to matter for the future, even for that one business. So whatever we do, I think, as storytellers, and Derek knew that most of all, whatever we point our cameras at, and that's just his medium, is using a camera. It could have been a pen if he was a writer. So because that's his medium, he's seen the long picture and putting that down historically. You just want people to feel that actually just because they're in a set type of photography, that doesn't allow them to be documentary makers, but in actual fact, the fact that we're recording with whatever device really matters. Even in these phones, and that's something that I'm trying to address, like I do like an MA at the minute, but it's trying to address that feeling that actually everybody does have the permission to take pictures. And you know, Derek had that, that he's like a camera. And again, back in the day, well, we're the big pro snappers of the day thinking, well, he's just using that little camera and he's just wandering around. How do we question each other's authenticity with a camera? It's nonsense to do that. What's really valid is that we address that we're trying to tell a story of our time. And the problem is with essentially Instagram, Amazon mentality is like, take one picture and actually produce that for the day. That's not helpful, because it doesn't encourage us to take 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, a whole catalogue of images, which Derek did. And that's where that needs retraining, is to say to everybody, you have the right, and you really should be taking a story full of images. And it's like, where do we see that picture post now? Why do we see what Derek did anymore? Well, actually, there's a version of probably part of me that says, let's recreate it.
So tell me a bit about Derek's approach about having the camera down here and his connection with people and how that translates into your work.
Okay, so Derek actually had essentially quite a small camera, and he kept himself relatively discreet. So it was a case that, you know, Derek was the person in the space really before his camera. And you'll know probably when you see photographers work these days that essentially a camera is up and it's in somebody's face. Well, a little bit like actually the way that I work, and obviously Derek would have had to work back in the day. He had a little Leica camera, and that's what, you know, is essentially, it's quite a relatively small camera, and he was essentially shooting from here. So it meant that he could carry on engaging with his subject, talking to his subject, particularly the children, at the same time as taking the picture. And that's just really important, because what it creates is an intimacy between the subject and himself. And I think that's something that we see within the pictures, that the spatial awareness between himself and who he's photographing is actually quite short. And he's also grasping these sorts of beautiful engagements between, you know, a father and a child, or the laughter of a child in one of his pictures. A little bit sort of like Robert Dwasny, you know, the boy with the two bottles. There's all that engagement of human spirit going on, and that's just, you can only capture that by really having your camera as really part of your hand or part of your body, but certainly not part of your face. So in terms of how I work, well, I use mirrorless cameras, which are indeed much smaller. They've also got a live view screen, so it means essentially I can shoot from the hip as well. And that's something that I've felt absolutely incredible with mirrorless technology, is that you can have the camera on silent, which means you haven't got that clicking that somebody's thinking, what is going on here? And the second thing is essentially you don't have the camera blocking your face, which you have to keep having conversations with people. So they don't really know that you're taking the picture, but that's part of the discreet way we take pictures.
So talk about the composition and maybe that idea of repeat visits to places and getting the stance.
Okay, so in terms of composition, Derek had a really unique Derek style, essentially, of how to photographing certain events. Now, he visited the Fownhope Heart of Oak day, year on year, and that was something that essentially has created that body of work. In any case, is a fantastic historic body of work. But what's interesting is year on year, and I know because I photographed it this last year myself, is that, you know, you'd be keen year on year to go back and you know the best vantage points for getting those best pictures. Now, that wasn't his, knowing Derek as in that he was a people person and his objectives were totally people-led. The choices of composition within that, it was interesting to sort of walk in his shoes and see what he was essentially trying to get from that. Yeah, so the Heart of Oak photographs is that Derek essentially kind of uses a lot of high vantage points to photograph the whole of the parade coming through. And that's really important, obviously, because the whole of the town comes out to actually, the whole of the village actually comes out to essentially take part. And still to this day they do that. So it's a very busy event. And I think he was keen, obviously, to get the scale of that event. But that said, there's also a lot of sort of tiny little generational pictures going on, which are very beautiful within that. And so it's as a photographer, it's quite a busy day, because essentially you're high up and then you're down and then you're amongst it. But he really did concern himself with the amongst it pictures and identifying those characters who appeared year on year on year. So this is a really classic sort of example of that. Now, compositionally, I guess, you know, these days, you know, we're essentially bothered with, you know, how something is going to be placed if it was in print. Well, Derek kind of came from a press background as well. So he would have had those journalistic values. In terms of placement, you know, he's taken obviously a portrait as a portrait picture, and he would have been looking at the placement of that in a magazine or newspaper like any of us would. Essentially, he had to conform to certain photographic conventions in order, obviously, for those pictures to go on and sell, because that, of course, was also a primary element as, equally. But within this, again, his concern is really telling the stories of those people that come out through the pictures as well. Of course, these are all black and white, essentially. So, but if I just grab one from behind here, this is a classic example, just going back to how he would arrange people within the photograph to tell the whole story. And this is classic Derek. That even this child on the end with her back turned to these boys, we can assume, I don't know, it's a boy potentially or another girl, but who knows. But her back turned towards this sort of social engagement, a little social engagement, and we're asked to really sort of have really our own comment on this, on what's happening within that. So he could have gone in closer, he could have cropped in closer just to these two, but would the picture have had the same meaning? And that is what I like about Derek's work. He actually offers it back to us because he steps a little bit wider than that. I guess in following in his footsteps myself, probably that's one lesson that I would take from Derek, is that when I actually do this sort of close work, I end up going in too close because I'm so excited about what's going on in the picture. But he had that almost pausing in a breath to stand back a little bit more and say, do you know what, let's give the viewer the chance to actually make some choice about the images.
That's lovely.
So Derek's work's really important for two reasons, really. We have to look at the importance of a body of print work from the past, and it's too easy to say, well, actually, it isn't accessible. The reality is it's very accessible. Of course, it's in the archives, but it's print material. In terms of Derek's work, is that he was revisiting certain events over and over again. So essentially, he has not only a very sort of simplistic view, which is obviously visiting the event, but actually he's recording generations of interaction. And then going forward from that, of course, well, he was an international photographer as well. And again, like all those great photographers, we all refer back to their printed material of the time. The question is now is to actually start saying, well, actually, where will we as photographers, and we're all photographers, we all carry a camera around with us. The problem is that we exist in the cloud, we exist online. And it's my concern is really, how do we really kind of make our own work have the same longevity and importance that Derek and other photographers of his time had? So, I think that we need to probably ourselves, when we visit certain fates and events like that Derek has, or, obviously he's been, the hot field work is classic. Is classic Derek, of the interactions with people, is that, when we take our own cameras, and be it your own iPhone, that you don't take just that one picture when you go in because, you want to store that, on your Instagram, is that you take that one step further and actually you tell a little story when you're at wherever you're at. And then maybe, ideally, of course, it would be great if there was a way that all our little stories could be downloaded to a place really of archive. So our stories actually matter for the future and for future generations. So the beauty of Derek's work is that essentially, we've got it in printed form. It is archived. It's because it was in a tangible, a form that it was in either in print or a book, as like most photographers of his time were. The concern today is essentially that photography, well, we take it, it's all on our computers and it's all in the cloud. And that is a bit of a concern for me, is Derek the last of his kind, the last of the photographers of that kind, who have material and who have stories, who are essentially on print form. We've got to turn around to ourselves and say, actually, we all have cameras on us. There are stories out there. We need to be probably telling those stories more than just one Insta-snap. So we can continue all these stories onward for the future. So the important thing to remember is that Derek was a film photographer, as in he worked on film. And that's a strange concept these days, because of course we're so embedded in digital, but the way that film actually did matter back in the day, and essentially matters to the archive now, is that you have to remember that, like me, I originally started on film as well, but when we were sent out on jobs with a 36 roll of film, essentially I was expected to go out and do 3 jobs on 136 film. So you had 36 shots. Now, film was obviously relatively expensive, and how that translates to a single picture, it means is that you will be having to work really hard with your eyes to see, that was the shot. That's the shot, because you'd only probably have to come away, and I'm sure Derek was the same, had to think, okay, I've only got so many rolls to spend on this event, or in a short event, he may only want to take 4 shots and then move on to another event and take another 4 shots. So, that's really important in terms of understanding how he would have had to work and how hard he would have had to work to see a picture at the time. Now, it's easy to think today, well, of course, we just go in there with our chip that probably takes 400 pictures in one event. I think to be trained actually as a film photographer in the first place is a really great thing, because you go in there and your eye and your brain is working to that end result. Because at the end of the day, it still matters today, because the more you're in front of a computer editing, the more time is lost. So to be a film photographer working in digital, it's still a good thing.